Here's a way of thinking about Christian theology and God from a Jungian perspective. And I admit, I didn't know at first what to make of this because it was stretching my thoughts out beyond where I had been able to develop them. And it was after I read several of Jung's most famous pieces of work, and I would also say most complex pieces of work, namely Answer to Job and Aeon researches into the phenomenology of the self. It was after I read those texts several times and really gave them a great deal of thought that I started to come to these conclusions. So imagine that there's a very wide range of human behaviors, and some subset of those are both admirable and not admirable. Let's call them good and evil at the extremes. And then we might say there are patterns that characterize all the actions that are good and patterns that characterize all the actions that are evil. And that's a transpersonal pattern because it's not just about you or me, it's about everyone. And so then this gets personified and anthropomorphized, so that ends up as Christ and Satan. That's Cain and Abel. All those patterns get personified into what we would consider that is a bad guy and that is a good guy in current film and stories over time. It's like Thor and Loki, right? So now take the idea of Christ and let's say that that's the abstraction of everything that's admirably good about the set of all human behaviors. And then you think, well, what sort of reality does that have? So there's this spirit of good, let's say, and what the spirit of good does is act in the world on the potential of the world to generate the actuality of the world. And if you confront the potential of the world with good in mind, then the order that you're going to extract is good. And that's echoed in the Genesis myth in the Bible when God uses the word and he creates cosmos out of potential. And every time he does that, he says that it's good, which is interesting because there's a proposition there. And the proposition there is that if you encounter potential with goodness, then the cosmos that you create is actually good. And that's actually an absolutely overwhelming idea. I mean, if that's true, that's one of the greatest ideas ever. So then the fall of man, then, in the Genesis myth, and from a Jungian sense, is the story or archetypal understanding that you recognize that you're naked and weak. You know that you can be hurt. You know that you're vulnerable and insufficient and that you're going to die at some point. So then you hide from God, saying here that God is the symbol of your own personal destiny. So you hide from God because that's what happens next. And the reason you hide from God, again, saying God is your destiny, or that you walking with God is a manifestation of your ultimate proper destiny, then you hiding from God is you're doubting whether you're capable of that destiny and that purpose. Because now you realize that you embody a weak and insufficient human form. So you hide and you're ashamed. And so there's that you also realize that you could be hurt and suffer, and that kind of goes along with that. And again, Jung discusses this to some degree in his text, Answer to Job, and Jung's interpretation of Yahweh, or God, is as an archaic form of the self. Job was an archaic form of the ego, and Satan was the archaic form of individuation. And Jung interprets the evolution of the God image portrayed in the Old Testament and the New Testament as a process of psychological development. So in the book of Job, the archaic self is prompted to develop towards consciousness by the more conscious ego, a process attended by dreams and prophecies. And this happens in the Old Testament with the prophets. And the self enters ego consciousness, which is the incarnation of God in the Jesus of Nazareth story. And followed by that is the emergence of the transcendent function. So therefore, God, for Jung, was this deep reality itself, was the collective unconscious. And to refer to Paul Tillich, the theologian Paul Tillich, the ground of being, so to speak. So therefore, for Jung, the whole idea of Christianity and the story of Christianity and the archetypes that hide within Christianity are really a story about the psychological self and the evolution of the psyche from its archaic form to its more transcendent and whole form.